My name is Harper Montgomery, and I'm 29 years old. I was standing at my younger brother's wedding reception, champagne glass trembling in my hand, when my parents approached with those glowing, proud faces they reserved only for him. My mother Constance, elegant in her silver gown, and my father Roland, chest puffed with satisfaction, cornered me near the elaborate ice sculpture. "Your brother's wedding was perfect. When is yours?" my mother asked, her voice dripping with that particular tone that suggested I was falling behind in life's race. I looked at them, at their expectant faces, at my brother Preston smirking from across the marble dance floor, and something inside me finally snapped. "I already had it," I said quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. My father's smile cracked like porcelain. Preston's smirk transformed into a look of pure shock. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there speechless, my husband Marcus' hand warm and steady in mine. Before I tell you how I got to that moment, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments, because I want to know where my story is reaching. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the forgotten child, hit that like button right now. Subscribe because this story is about to get wild, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when a family built on appearances finally crumbles. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in the Montgomery family meant living in a postcard that nobody wanted to read the back of. We lived in a sprawling colonial house in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of place where the hedges were always trimmed and the cars in the driveway always gleamed. My father, Roland, had built his fortune as an investment banker, the type of man who wore his success like armor and expected his children to reflect his glory. My mother, Constance, had been a socialite before marriage, and afterward, she poured all her unfulfilled ambitions into orchestrating the perfect family image. Dinner parties, charity galas, country club memberships, everything designed to show the world that the Montgomerys had it all figured out. But inside those pristine walls, there was a hierarchy as rigid as any corporate structure, and I learned early that I was not at the top. Preston was 3 years younger than me, but you'd never know it from the way our parents treated him. He was the golden boy, the heir apparent, the child who could do no wrong even when he did everything wrong. I remember being 16 when Preston got his driver's license and our parents bought him a brand new BMW, midnight blue with leather seats that still had that new car smell. I'd been driving a used Honda Civic that I'd bought myself with money from my summer job at the library. When I pointed out the disparity, my mother had patted my hand and said, "Well, dear, Preston needs to make the right impression, you understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that in this family, appearances mattered more than fairness, and Preston's appearance mattered more than mine. The pattern continued through college and beyond. Preston went to Yale, his tuition paid in full, his fraternity dues covered, his spring break trips to Cancun funded without question. I went to the state university with a partial scholarship and student loans that I'm still paying off. Preston graduated with a degree in business and promptly started a series of ventures that failed one after another, each time cushioned by our parents' money and connections. I graduated with honors in graphic design and started my own small business, scraping by in a tiny apartment, proud of every client I earned through my own work. At family dinners, the conversation always circled back to Preston. Preston is exploring opportunities in tech. Preston is networking with some very important people. Preston is considering his options. My accomplishments were met with distracted nods. "That's nice, dear, but did you hear that Preston is thinking about opening a consulting firm?" Every family gathering felt like a Preston appreciation event. Holidays, birthdays, random Sunday dinners, the script never changed. Our parents would beam at him, hang on his every word, laugh at his mediocre jokes as if he were performing stand-up comedy. I could announce that I'd landed a major client or won a design award, and my mother would say, "That's wonderful, Harper," before immediately turning to Preston and asking about his latest business idea. The message was clear and consistent. Preston was the sun around which this family orbited, and I was somewhere out past Pluto, barely visible, easily forgotten. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their validation, but that was a lie I was getting tired of telling. Then came the engagement announcement that would set everything in motion. 6 months before that explosive moment at the wedding reception, Preston had gathered us all for Sunday dinner and announced that he was engaged to Vivienne Ashford, a woman whose family's wealth made ours look middle class. She was beautiful in that expensive way, with professionally highlighted hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. My mother had actually squealed with delight, something I'd never heard her do. My father had pulled out a bottle of champagne that cost more than my monthly rent. The planning began immediately. "We're thinking a fall wedding," Preston had said, and my mother was already pulling out her phone to start making calls. The budget they discussed casually over dessert was $250,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. I'd been dating Marcus for 2 years at that point, and I'd mentioned him at family dinners, brought him to a few gatherings, tried to integrate him into the family fold. Marcus taught history at a public high school, spent his summers volunteering at education nonprofits, and read philosophy for fun. He was kind and genuine and brilliant. Everything that mattered to me and nothing that mattered to my parents. When I'd quietly mentioned that Marcus and I were getting serious, that we'd talked about our future together, my mother had given me that smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes either. "Well, when you find someone suitable, well, see about a celebration," she'd said. The word suitable had landed like a slap. Marcus, with his modest teacher's salary and his old Subaru and his student loan debt, was not suitable. Not for a Montgomery. The sting of that moment stayed with me for weeks. I need to tell you about Marcus, about how we met, because it matters. It matters that in a life where I'd always felt like I was auditioning for a role I'd never get, Marcus made me feel like I was already the star. 3 years ago, I'd been working late at a coffee shop in the city, hunched over my laptop trying to finish a logo design for a demanding client. My eyes were burning, my back ached, and I was considering just giving up and going home when someone set a fresh cup of coffee next to my computer. "You look like you could use this," Head said. And when I looked up, there was Marcus. Warm brown eyes, slightly messy dark hair, a smile that was genuinely friendly without any agenda behind it. We'd started talking, and before I knew it, 2 hours had passed and the coffee shop was closing. We'd dated the old-fashioned way, slowly and intentionally. Dinners at small restaurants where we talked about everything from art to politics to our childhoods. Walks through museums where Marcus would tell me the stories behind historical artifacts and I'd sketch the sculptures we passed. Bookstore browsing where we'd pick out books for each other and then discuss them over coffee the next week. Marcus never cared that I drove a beat-up car or that my apartment was barely bigger than a closet. He never asked about my family's money or tried to network with my father. He loved me, for my terrible jokes and my perfectionist tendencies, and the way I'd get so absorbed in a design project that I'd forget to eat. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, really seen, not as the disappointing daughter or the shadow of a golden child, but as Harper, complete and whole on my own. When Marcus proposed a year ago during a hiking trip, he didn't hire a photographer or plan an elaborate setup. We'd reached a vista point overlooking a valley filled with fall colors, and Head simply turned to me, pulled out his grandmother's vintage ring, and said, "Harper, you're my best friend and my favorite person. Will you marry me?" I'd said yes before Head even finished the sentence. The ring was simple, a small diamond in an antique setting, and it was perfect. We didn't announce it on social media or throw an engagement party. We were just happy, quietly and genuinely happy, in a way that didn't need an audience. But we did tell my parents, because despite everything, some part of me still hoped they'd care, still hoped this would be the moment they'd finally see me. We'd gone to Sunday dinner the following week, and after the meal, while my mother was serving coffee, I'd cleared my throat and said, "Marcus and I have some news. We're engaged." I'd held up my hand, showing the ring. There was a pause, a moment where I thought maybe this would be different, maybe this would matter. Then my mother had said, "That's lovely, dear," in the exact tone she used when I told her about a new client. My father had glanced up from his phone long enough to nod vaguely in our direction. And Preston had smirked and said, "A teacher? Good luck living on that salary, sis. Hope you like ramen noodles." Had laughed like it was a joke, but the cruelty was sharp and intentional. My mother had immediately pivoted the conversation. Now, about Preston's engagement party, I was thinking we should do it at the country club. The seating chart is going to be complex with Vivienne's family. That night, lying in bed in the apartment Marcus and I shared. Id cried until my chest ached. Marcus had held me, stroking my hair, not saying much because what was there to say? We both knew the truth. To my family, I didn't matter, and by extension neither did he. That's when we made the decision together, lying there in the dark. "Let's just do it," Marcus had whispered. "Let's get married, just us, the way we want. Not for them, for us." Id pulled back to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "A courthouse wedding?" Id asked. "The simplest, most real wedding imaginable," Id said. "No performance, no audience. Just you and me making promises we actually mean." Id never loved him more than in that moment. 3 months ago, on a Tuesday morning in April, we'd gone to City Hall. I wore a simple white dress I'd found at a department store for $80. Marcus wore his best suit, the navy one he saved for parent-teacher conferences. We'd asked 2 of our friends, people who actually knew us and loved us, to be our witnesses. The ceremony took 10 minutes, the judge was kind and efficient. Marcus' hands shook slightly when he put the ring on my finger, and Id had to blink back tears when I said my vows. Afterward, we'd gone to our favorite Italian restaurant, the tiny family-owned place where we'd had our first date, and eaten pasta and drank wine, and felt like we'd pulled off the most perfect heist. It wasn't grand or expensive or Instagram-worthy. It was intimate and real and ours. That night, officially married, we'd decided not to tell my family. We'd wait and see if anyone noticed, if anyone cared enough to ask. 3 months passed. Not once did my mother call to ask about wedding plans. Not once did my father inquire about our relationship. Preston was too absorbed in his own wedding preparations to acknowledge my existence beyond asking me to help with various tasks. It was like a social experiment in invisibility, and I was the ghost haunting my own family. I'd look at our marriage certificate sometimes, this official document that said I was Marcus' wife, and marvel at how something so significant could be so thoroughly ignored. But I also felt a strange kind of freedom in it. We'd done it our way, without their judgment or interference or demands. We belonged to each other, not to the performance of a perfect family wedding. Still, the hurt lingered, a dull ache that reminded me it'd always be secondary in the family hierarchy. The 4 months leading up to Preston's wedding were a masterclass in how to be used without acknowledgement. My phone became an extension of my mother's wedding planning stress, ringing at all hours with emergencies that ranged from the florist using the wrong shade of blush pink to the calligrapher spelling a guest name incorrectly on an invitation. "Harper, I need you to call the florist and sort this out." Shed demand, as if I didn't have my own work and my own life. "Harper, can you pick up the table runners from the rental company?" "Harper, the caterer needs a decision on the appetizer selection and I'm too busy, can you handle it?" Every request framed as if she were doing me a favor by including me, when really I was free labor for an event celebrating the child who actually mattered. The dress shopping expeditions were particularly painful. Vivian had her bridal party, a collection of equally polished women who looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog, but somehow I was expected to attend every fitting and give my opinion. I'd sit in expensive boutiques, holding garment bags and designer shopping bags, watching my mother fawn over Vivian while I was essentially invisible. "You look stunning, darling." My mother would coo at Vivian, using an endearment I couldn't remember her ever directing at me. I'd offer opinions when asked, always polite, always helpful, and they'd be considered for about 3 seconds before being dismissed. The whole production was designed to remind me of my place. I was support staff, not the star. The bridal shower was perhaps the cruelest assignment. Vivienne had a maid of honor, her sister Cordelia, who, by all logic, should have been organizing this event. But somehow the task fell to me. "Harper's so good at organizing," my mother had announced at a family dinner, volunteering me without asking. I'd spent 2 weeks planning an elaborate garden party at my parents' house, arranging for catering, decorations, games, a photographer. I'd maxed out my credit card on supplies, telling myself it was fine, it was family, I could manage. The shower itself was beautiful, everything executed perfectly, and at the end, Vivian had thanked Cordelia effusively for putting together such a wonderful event. My mother hadn't corrected her. I'd stood there with a frozen smile, applauding along with everyone else, while Marcus watched from the sidelines with barely concealed fury. The financial disparity was impossible to ignore. My parents spared no expense for Preston's wedding. His bachelor party in Las Vegas cost $15,000, a weekend of excess that my father funded with a casual swipe of his platinum card. Vivian's wedding dress cost $12,000, a designer creation that required 3 fittings and a special preservation box for storage afterward. The venue deposit alone was $50,000 for an exclusive country club that overlooked Long Island Sound. Meanwhile, I was late on my rent payment because ED used that money to cover the bridal shower expenses ED never be reimbursed for. I didn't ask my parents for help because I already knew what the answer would be. They'd remind me that I was an adult who should manage my own finances, conveniently forgetting that Preston's entire lifestyle was subsidized by their bank account. Marcus had picked up extra tutoring jobs to help us cover our bills, working late nights after his regular teaching day ended, and watching him come home exhausted while my family threw money at Preston's wedding made me angrier than it'd ever been. We'd discuss it sometimes late at night, Marcus trying to convince me to confront them, me explaining that it wouldn't change anything. They don't see it as inequality. I'd tell him. They see it as investment in the child who reflects well on them. Marcus would shake his head, baffled by the dysfunction, but he'd hold me and remind me that we had each other and that was worth more than anything my family could offer. He was right, but it didn't stop the burning resentment that grew with each passing week. The final straw came 1 week before the wedding. Eid mentioned to my mother during one of her many phone calls that Eid need to take time off work for all the wedding events. Shed responded cheerfully, "Of course, darling. This is the most important week of your brother's life." Id paused, testing the waters carefully. "It's a lot of commitment," Id said. "Almost like getting married yourself." My mother hadn't caught the hint. Hadn't heard the weight behind my words. "Well, marriage is serious, Harper. That's why Preston waited until he found the right person. Someone from a good family who understands our values." The implication was clear as glass. Marcus, with his middle-class background and public school salary, didn't understand our values. He wasn't from a good family, at least not by their standards. Id ended the call shortly after, my hands shaking with suppressed rage. That night, Id told Marcus about the conversation, and had been quiet for a long moment before saying, "Let's tell them after the wedding. Let them have their perfect day for Preston." Then we drop the truth on them and walk away. Id agreed, feeling a dark satisfaction at the thought. They could have their elaborate celebration, their $250,000 performance, their perfect photos, and their society page announcement. And then Id tell them that while they were busy worshipping at the altar of Preston's achievement, Id quietly built a real life with a real partner who actually loved me. The wedding couldn't come fast enough. The day of Preston's wedding arrived with the kind of flawless autumn weather that people pay premium rates to guarantee. Clear blue sky, temperature in the low 70s, leaves just starting to turn gold and crimson on the trees surrounding the country club. It arrived early because, of course, I had responsibilities, despite being only a bridesmaid and not part of the wedding party leadership. My dress, a pale champagne color that had cost me $350 I couldn't afford, hung perfectly but felt like a costume. Marcus had come with me, though technically he was just my +1, not even formally introduced to most of the extended family as my boyfriend, let alone my husband. That secret sat between us like a ticking bomb, and every time our eyes met, I could see he was thinking the same thing I was, just a few more hours. The ceremony was everything my parents had envisioned, a flawless production that would photograph beautifully and give them bragging rights for years. 300 guests filled the rows of white chairs arranged on the country club's manicured lawn. A string quartet played classical music that probably cost more per hour than I made in a week. Rose petals lined the aisle, released by a team of coordinators at precisely the right moment. Vivian looked stunning in her $12,000 gown, walking down the aisle on her father's arm while guests murmured appreciation. Preston stood at the altar in his custom tuxedo, looking every inch the successful young man my parents had always wanted him to be, even if the reality beneath that surface was far more complicated. I stood with the other bridesmaids, holding my bouquet, watching my parents in the front row. My mother was crying, actual tears of joy streaming down her carefully made-up face. My father had his arm around her, his expression one of pure pride. I wondered if they'd cried at any of my life events, at my college graduation, or when Eid landed my first major client, or when Eid told them I was engaged. The answer was obvious. This moment, Preston's moment, this was what mattered to them. The officiant spoke about love and commitment, about two families joining together, about the sacred bond of marriage. I thought about my own wedding, the 10-minute ceremony at City Hall, the judge who'd been kind but efficient, the complete lack of fanfare. I didn't regret it for a second, but standing there watching the performance my parents had orchestrated for Preston, I felt the weight of their favoritism like never before. The reception was even more elaborate, held in the country club's grand ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Sound. The tables were decorated with centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, towers of white hydrangeas and roses that released a subtle fragrance into the air. Dinner was 5 courses, each paired with a different wine, served by an army of waiters in crisp uniforms. I sat at a table with Marcus and some distant cousins who didn't know me well enough to ask probing questions. Marcus kept his hand on my knee under the table, a steady reminder that I wasn't alone in this, that after tonight, everything would change. The speeches started after dinner, and they were exactly what I expected. Preston's college roommate went first, telling stories about their fraternity days that painted Preston as charming and ambitious. He always knew what he wanted and how to get it, the roommate said, laughing. Preston never met a goal he couldn't achieve. The guests laughed and applauded, admiring this quality as if it were wholly positive, not recognizing the selfishness that underlay it. My father went next, standing with his champagne glass raised, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "My son," he said, and his voice actually broke with emotion. "My pride and joy has found his perfect match. Watching him grow into the man he is today has been the greatest privilege of my life." He went on for 5 minutes about Preston's accomplishments, his character, his future. Not once did he mention having a daughter. The dancing and cake cutting followed the speeches, more photo opportunities for the professional photographer my parents had hired. I watched Vivienne and Preston's first dance, watched my parents join them on the floor, watched the whole choreographed performance unfold like a movie I'd seen too many times. When it came time for the bouquet toss, I tried to fade into the background, but Vivienne had other plans. Shed caught my eye from across the dance floor, and when she threw the bouquet, she aimed it directly at me with the precision of a quarterback. I caught it reflexively, the flowers heavy in my hands, and Vivienne called out in a voice that carried, "Your turn next, Harper. If you can find someone, of course." The guests laughed, thinking it was playful teasing, not seeing the cruelty underneath. I stood there holding the bouquet, feeling the weight of their pity and amusement, and slowly crushed the stems in my fist. The evening wound down gradually, guests getting progressively more drunk and sentimental. My parents were glowing, working the room, accepting compliments on the beautiful wedding they'd orchestrated. I heard my mother tell a group of relatives, "We did it! The perfect wedding for our perfect boy." My father was nearby, and someone asked him if he had more weddings to plan. Head laughed and said, "Well, we have a daughter, but who knows when she'll settle down. She's always been the independent type." The dismissal was casual, automatic, the kind of slight I'd absorbed my entire life. Marcus had heard it too, and I felt him tense beside me. I squeezed his hand, a signal to wait, to hold on just a little longer. That's when my parents approached me, drinks in hand, faces flushed with success and champagne. They cornered me near the elaborate dessert table, away from the main crowd. My mother looked at me with those bright, evaluating eyes that had never been able to please. "Your brother's wedding was perfect. When is yours?" she asked, the question landing like a judgment I'd been waiting for my whole life, the implication clear in her tone. When would I finally get my act together? When would I finally do something that made them proud? My father stood beside her, nodding, waiting for my answer like I was a problem he was tired of solving. Something inside me cracked wide open, and I felt Marcus' hand tighten on mine, supportive and strong. I looked at my parents, at their expectant faces, at the beautiful ballroom and the perfect wedding and the life they'd built that had no real room for me. The words came out calm and clear and absolutely devastating. I already had it. The silence that followed my statement was profound, a pocket of stillness in the middle of the reception's ambient noise. My mother's expression cycled through confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like fear. Her champagne glass tilted in her hand, forgotten. My father's face, usually so controlled, went completely blank as his brain tried to process what Id just said. "What do you mean you already had it?" my mother finally asked, her voice tight and strange. "Had what, exactly?" I reached into my small evening bag, pulled out my phone, and opened the photo Id saved specifically for this moment. The image of Marcus and me at City Hall, the judge smiling between us, my simple white dress, our hands clasped together, the marriage certificate visible in the foreground. I held the phone out to them. "My wedding. Marcus and I got married 3 months ago." My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound sharp and final. The crash drew attention from nearby guests, heads turning toward the commotion. My father's face transformed, going from blank to purple with rage in the span of seconds. "What do you mean you got married? How could you?" His voice was rising, drawing more attention. My mother was staring at the phone like it was showing her something obscene. "This can't be real. You're lying. Why would you lie about something like this?" I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "I'm not lying. We got married at City Hall in April. It was small and simple and exactly what we wanted. I told you we were engaged. You didn't care enough to ask about wedding plans, so we made our own." That's when Preston materialized, sensing drama like a shark sensing blood in the water. He grabbed my arm roughly, his face twisted with anger. "What's going on? What are you doing? You're ruining my reception." I yanked my arm free, standing my ground. "I'm not ruining anything, Preston. I'm just sharing my news. I got married. Isn't that something to celebrate?" His eyes widened as the words registered, and then he exploded. "You what? You selfish bitch, you're trying to steal my spotlight. This is my day, my wedding. And you have to make it about you." The guests who'd been pretending not to watch were now openly staring, the drama too juicy to ignore. Vivienne had appeared at Preston's side, clutching his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. My mother found her voice again, though it came out shrill and desperate. "How could you do this to us? How could you get married without telling us? We would have thrown you a wedding. We would have celebrated with you." The hypocrisy was so blatant it would have been funny if it weren't so painful. I laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "Really, Mom? Like you threw enthusiasm at my engagement? Like, you asked about wedding plans even once in the past year? You were too busy with Preston's perfect wedding to care about mine." My father stepped closer, his finger pointing at me accusingly. "This is disrespectful. Sneaking around behind our backs, making major life decisions without consulting your family. This is how we raised you." I felt Marcus move beside me, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. His voice was calm but firm. "That's enough. Harper doesn't deserve this. She deserves parents who actually care about her happiness, not just about appearances and which son is performing better for your ego." My father's attention snapped to Marcus, his anger finding a new target. "Stay out of this, teacher. This is family business. You wouldn't understand." Marcus didn't flinch. "I am family. I'm her husband." The word hung in the air, undeniable and official. My mother made a small gasping sound, pressing her hand to her chest like she was having a heart attack. Preston was practically vibrating with rage, his perfect wedding day narrative disrupted by his sister's shocking revelation. The scene was now fully public, a ring of guests watching the Montgomery family drama unfold like a reality television show. I could see extended family members looking scandalized, friends of my parents whispering behind their hands, Preston's groomsmen watching with wide eyes. Some faces in the crowd looked sympathetic, particularly some of the younger cousins who probably had their own complicated relationships with family expectations. But most looked shocked or disapproving. These people who had known me my whole life but never really seen me. My mother was hissing now, trying to regain some control over the situation. "We will discuss this at home. You've embarrassed us enough for one night. People are watching." I looked around at all those watching faces, at the perfect wedding reception that was now tainted with family drama, at my parents' horrified expressions, at Preston's fury. And I felt something I hadn't expected. I felt free. "No, Mom. I'm done being embarrassed by you. I'm done apologizing for not being Preston. I'm proud of my marriage. I'm proud of my husband. He's kind and intelligent, and he actually loves me, not the idea of what I should be. That's more real than anything happening here tonight. I reached for Marcus' hand, feeling his fingers intertwine with mine, solid and sure. We're leaving now. Congratulations on the wedding, Preston. I hope it's everything you wanted. I turned to walk away, Marcus beside me, and the crowd parted like water. Behind us, I heard my mother call out, "Harper, don't you dare walk away from us." But I kept walking, my heels clicking on the marble floor, my head held high for the first time in years. I heard Preston shouting something, my father's angry voice, the murmur of scandalized guests. We walked through the ballroom, through the lobby, out into the cool autumn night. The valet brought Marcus' car, and we got in, driving away from the country club, from the perfect wedding, from the family that had never really wanted me anyway. I cried in the passenger seat, but they weren't sad tears. They were cleansing tears, the kind that come when you finally set down a weight you've been carrying your entire life. The silence from my family in the 2 weeks following Preston's wedding was absolute and deliberate. My phone, usually buzzing with my mother's demands and Preston's messages, was eerily quiet. I called my parents twice, leaving voicemails that went unanswered. I sent a text to my mother saying we should talk, that I hadn't meant to cause a scene but that we needed to address the underlying issues. The message showed as read, but no response came. It was the silent treatment elevated to an art form, and even though it expected some kind of fallout, the complete radio silence hurt more than I wanted to admit. Marcus kept reminding me that their silence said more about them than about me, but that logic didn't quite reach the part of me that still wanted my parents to care. Then, on a Tuesday evening, exactly 2 weeks after the wedding, my phone rang with Preston's name on the screen. For a brief, foolish moment, I hoped this might be an olive branch, a chance for reconciliation. I answered, and Preston's voice came through cold and clipped. "Harper, I'm calling because Mom and Dad asked me to deliver a message. They want you to know that you're not welcome at Thanksgiving this year. They need time and space to process what you did, and your presence would be too uncomfortable for everyone." The words landed like physical blows. Not welcome at Thanksgiving. The family holiday I'd attended every year of my life. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Preston, can't we talk about this like adults? I didn't mean to disrupt your wedding, I just needed them to finally see me." Preston's laugh was harsh and humorless. "See you? Harper, you've always been so dramatic. Nobody was ignoring you, you're just jealous that my life is going well and yours isn't. You married some poor teacher out of spite, and now you're trying to make Mom and Dad feel guilty about it. It's pathetic." His cruelty was casual, practiced, the same cruelty had wielded since we were children. But this time, it hit differently because now I understood it wasn't about me. It was about maintaining his position as the favored child, the golden boy who couldn't shine as brightly if I was visible too. "I didn't marry Marcus out of spite," I said quietly. "I married him because he loves me. Something you wouldn't understand because Vivian's family money is the only thing you actually love about her." The silence on the other end told me it'd hit a nerve. Then Preston's voice came back, lower and more dangerous. "You're going to regret this conversation. You're going to regret a lot of things." He hung up. Over the next week, I learned exactly what Preston's threat meant. My cousin Margot called me, someone I'd always been relatively close to despite the family dysfunction. She sounded uncomfortable on the phone. "Harper, I don't know how to tell you this, but there are some really weird stories circulating about you at family gatherings. Preston's been telling people that you deliberately planned to announce your marriage at his wedding to sabotage him. Has saying you've always been jealous of him and that you married Marcus specifically to upset your parents. People are buying it." I felt sick listening to her recount the lies Preston was spreading, watching my reputation being dismantled in real time. "That's not what happened," I told Margot. "I didn't announce it to sabotage him. They asked me when my wedding was, and I told them the truth. But Preston's narrative had already taken root in the family ecosystem. My Aunt Philippa, who'd never been particularly warm to me but had always been civil, called and left a scathing voicemail about how disappointed she was in my selfishness. My Uncle Raymond sent an email with the subject line, "Shame on you," that detailed all the ways I'd failed as a daughter and a sister. Even extended family members I barely knew were weighing in, their opinions shaped by Preston's version of events. Only my grandmother, Evelyn, my father's mother, reached out with kindness. She called one evening and simply said, "Harper, darling, I know what it's like to be the forgotten child. Your grandfather's family treated me exactly the same way when I married him. They wanted him to marry someone from their social circle, someone who fit their image. I didn't fit, so they punished me for years. I see them doing the same to you, and I want you to know you're not alone." Her words were a lifeline in a sea of hostility, but they couldn't fully prepare me for what came next. A thick envelope arrived at my apartment via certified mail, requiring my signature. Inside was a letter from my father's lawyer, formal and cold. The letter informed me that I was being removed from the family trust, my inheritance being redirected entirely to Preston, effective immediately. The reason cited was failure to uphold family values and deliberate actions designed to cause family discord and embarrassment. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling like it'd been punched in the stomach. It wasn't about the money itself. I'd never expected to inherit anything, had built my life assuming I'd have to make my own way. But the message behind the disinheritance was clear and brutal. "You are not our daughter anymore. You have been formally removed from this family." Marcus found me that evening sitting on our couch, the letter crumpled in my hands, tears streaming down my face. He read the letter, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to fury. "We're going there right now," he said, reaching for his car keys. "We're confronting them." "This is insane." I grabbed his arm, stopping him. "No, that's what they want. They want me to show up emotional and angry so they can point to it as more proof that I'm unstable, that I'm the problem. I won't give them that satisfaction." Marcus looked at me like I was breaking his heart, which I probably was. "Harper, you can't just take this. They're treating you like you're worthless." I pulled him down to sit beside me, his arms coming around me automatically. "I know what I'm worth," I said, though my voice shook. "And it has nothing to do with them anymore." The disinheritance felt like the final door slamming shut, the last connection to my family of origin severed. I'd been disowned in all but name, cast out for the crime of choosing my own happiness over their approval. That night, lying in bed unable to sleep, I felt the weight of complete family abandonment. I'd lost my parents, my brother, most of my extended family, all of it gone in a matter of weeks. Marcus held me while I cried, not trying to fix it because it couldn't be fixed, just being there in the wreckage with me. "We're your family now?" he whispered. "Me, my parents, our friends, the people who actually love you, that's your family." I wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that chosen family could replace the one I'd been born into. But that night, in the dark, I felt like I'd been erased from the only story I'd ever known. 2 months after the wedding, after 2 months of silence and isolation and slow healing, my grandmother Evelyn called and asked me to meet her for lunch. Not at my parents' house or anywhere public where we might be seen, but at an elegant French restaurant in the city, far from Greenwich and its gossip networks. I arrived to find her already seated at a private table in a back corner, looking as impeccably put together as always, but with an expression that suggested this wasn't a casual social lunch. She stood to embrace me, holding on longer than usual, and when we sat down, she reached across the table to grip my hand. "Harper, darling, there are things you need to know about your brother and your parents. Things I should have told you years ago but thought perhaps you'd be spared from. I was wrong." My grandmother opened her elegant leather handbag and pulled out a thick folder, the kind lawyers use for important documents. She laid it on the table between us, and I could see it was stuffed with papers, letters, printed emails. "I've been documenting things for years," she said, her voice low and serious. "Your grandfather, before he passed, made me promise to watch over both his grandchildren. He worried about Preston, worried that your parents were creating a monster by never setting boundaries or teaching consequences. He was right to worry." She opened the folder and began showing me the contents. Letters from Preston's college dean about academic dishonesty that had been quietly resolved with a large donation. Emails between my parents discussing how to cover up Preston's failed business ventures and present them as successes to the family. Bank statements showing the staggering amounts of money they'd poured into propping up his lifestyle. The evidence painted a picture I'd sensed but never confirmed. Preston's achievements, the ones my parents constantly bragged about, were largely fabricated or purchased. His successful consulting firm was actually hemorrhaging money, kept alive by my father's regular cash infusions. His business connections were people my father had called in favors with, not relationships Preston had built himself. The prestigious awards Head supposedly won were from organizations my parents donated heavily to. He's a con artist, my grandmother said bluntly, and your parents are his willing accomplices. They've invested so much in the image of Preston as the golden child that they can't afford for anyone to see the truth. Admitting he's a failure would mean admitting they failed as parents, and their egos can't handle that. But the revelations didn't stop there. My grandmother showed me more recent documents, things Shed uncovered in the past few months. Preston's business was not just failing, it was under investigation for fraudulent billing practices. Had been embezzling from his own company, using client money to fund his expensive lifestyle. The only reason he's not in legal trouble yet is because your father has lawyers managing it, my grandmother said. And the only reason he married Vivian is because he needed her family's money to cover his debts and maintain appearances. It was a business transaction, not a love match. I thought about Vivian's cold smiles, the way she and Preston interacted more like business partners than spouses, and suddenly it all made sense. My grandmother leaned forward, her eyes intense. Do you understand now why your marriage to Marcus was such a threat to them? It was real, it was based on love, not money or status or image. It exposed everything their family is built on as hollow and fake. You represented an alternative way of living, and that made you dangerous. The pieces clicked into place in my mind. My parents hadn't rejected me because I wasn't good enough. They'd rejected me because I was too real, too honest, too much of a mirror showing them what they'd become. Preston hadn't turned them against me out of simple sibling rivalry. Had done it strategically, making me the villain so no one would listen if I ever tried to expose his fraud. My grandmother closed the folder and pushed it across the table to me. I'm not telling you to use this information, that's your choice. But I am telling you to protect yourself. Preston will eventually need a scapegoat when everything collapses, and he's already laying the groundwork to make you that scapegoat. The family narrative is that you're jealous, unstable, vengeful. When his house of cards falls, he'll find a way to blame you if he can. She paused, her expression softening. Harper, you escaped. You got out before the whole rotten structure pulled you down with it. They're punishing you because you chose reality over their fantasy. But you were right to choose it. We talked for 2 more hours, my grandmother filling in details and context, explaining family dynamics I'd felt but never fully understood. She told me about her own experience marrying into the family, how my grandfather's relatives had treated her as an outsider for years because she came from a modest background, how Shed learned to document everything because they were the kind of people who rewrote history to suit their needs, how Shed watched my parents make the same mistakes with their children that her in-laws had made, favoring appearance over substance, performance over authenticity. The saddest part, she said as we were leaving, is that they genuinely don't see what they've done wrong. They believe their own story. They think Preston is successful and you're the disappointment. They'll die believing that, probably. Walking back to my car with the folder of evidence under my arm, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and grief. Vindication because I wasn't crazy, wasn't wrong about the dysfunction I'd perceived my whole life. Grief because my grandmother was right. My parents would never wake up, never see Preston clearly, never acknowledge what they'd done to me. The fantasy was too comfortable, too essential to their sense of self. But I also felt something else: gratitude. My grandmother had given me the truth, documented and undeniable, and in doing so had given me the power to protect myself. I didn't know if I'd ever need to use the information in that folder, but knowing it existed, knowing someone in the family saw the truth and stood with me, made me feel less alone than I had in months. 4 months after Preston's wedding, 4 months after he'd been exiled from my family, Marcus and I had built something beautiful in the ruins. We'd moved to Portland, Maine, far enough from Greenwich to feel like a fresh start, close enough to the ocean that we could walk on the beach on weekends. My graphic design business was thriving in ways it never had when I was trying to prove myself to my parents. Without their judgment hanging over me, I'd taken creative risks, reached out to clients I actually wanted to work with, and built a portfolio I was genuinely proud of. Marcus had gotten a job at a progressive private school that valued his innovative teaching methods. Wed found a small house with a garden and big windows, and we were happy, genuinely happy, in a way that had nothing to do with money or status or approval. Then, on a cold January evening, my phone rang with Preston's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Preston's voice came through, and he sounded nothing like the arrogant golden boy I'd known my whole life. He sounded desperate. "Harper, I need your help. Everything's falling apart. Vivienne found out about the affairs. She's filing for divorce. Her family's cutting me off. The business is under investigation. I owe hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mom and Dad can't cover it all. I'm drowning here." There was silence while I processed this, while I absorbed the fact that my brother, who'd turned the family against me, was now asking for my help. "Preston," I said slowly. "Why are you calling me? You told the whole family I was selfish and jealous. You got me disinherited. You've spent months destroying my reputation, and now you want my help." His voice cracked slightly. I know I messed up. But you're my sister. Family helps family, right? I'm sorry for what I said. I was just jealous, okay? You have real love with Marcus. You have something authentic. I have nothing. Everything's a lie and it's all falling apart and I don't know what to do. For a moment, I almost softened. Almost let the old patterns pull me back in, the pattern of Harper fixing things and making sacrifices and putting her own needs last. But then Preston kept talking. "Maybe you could talk to Marcus' parents? They have savings, right? Maybe they could help me out? I'd pay them back once I get things sorted." The mask slipped fully off, and I saw clearly what this call was. Not an apology, not real reconciliation. Just another attempt to use me, to exploit any resource I had access to take what he needed and leave me with nothing. "No," I said, my voice firm and clear. "No, Preston. Figure it out yourself." His tone changed instantly, the desperation morphing into familiar cruelty. "You selfish bitch. After everything Mom and Dad did for you? You grew up in that house, you had every advantage, and this is how you repay them? By abandoning your family when we need you?" I laughed. A real laugh. "Everything they did for me? Preston, they did nothing for me. They poured everything into you, and you squandered it. You built your life on lies and other people's money, and now it's collapsing. That's not my problem. That's yours." I hung up while he was still sputtering curses. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated my family's desperation. The next day, a Saturday morning when Marcus and I were having coffee in our sunny kitchen, there was an aggressive knock on our front door. I opened it to find my parents standing on my porch, looking older and harder than I remembered. My father pushed past me into the house without invitation, my mother following. "We need to talk about your brother," my father announced, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when he expected to be obeyed. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, standing beside me in silent support. "Preston's in trouble," my mother said, wringing her hands. "Serious financial trouble, legal trouble. He needs family support right now, and you need to help him." I crossed my arms, standing my ground in my own home. "Why would I help him? He turned you all against me. He spread lies about me. Has spent months making sure I was isolated from the family, and now you want me to bail him out." My father's face reddened. "Has your brother? Family takes care of family, even when there have been disagreements. We're here to heal the rift and move forward together." The audacity was breathtaking. 4 months of silence, of being cut off and disinherited and slandered, dismissed as disagreements that we should just move past now that they needed something from me. "You're not here to heal anything," I said quietly. "You're here because Preston's in trouble and you think you can use me. Just like you've always used me." My mother's expression shifted to something almost pleading. "Harper, don't be dramatic. We're your parents. We're here now, aren't we? Doesn't that count for something?" The question hung in the air, and I thought about it seriously for a moment. Did it count? Did it matter that they'd driven 4 hours to see me, even if it was only because they wanted something? Maybe to some daughters it would have mattered. But I'd spent 29 years begging for crumbs of their attention and approval. I was done being hungry. "You're here 4 months after you cut me off," I said. 4 months after you disinherited me. 4 months of silence. You're not here because you missed me or because you're sorry. You're here because you need something. That's the only time I've ever mattered to you. My father stepped forward, his face hardening. We're your parents. You owe us respect. You owe us gratitude for the life we gave you. Now we're asking, as your parents, for you to help your brother. Marcus moved slightly closer to me, a solid presence at my back. She doesn't owe you anything, Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. Harper gave you respect and gratitude her whole life, and you gave her scraps. You're not owed anything else. My mother turned her attention to Marcus, as if seeing him for the first time. This is family business. This doesn't concern you. Marcus didn't flinch. I'm her family. Her husband. You're the ones who don't belong here. The truth of that statement settled over the room like snow. My parents, standing in my home that they'd never visited before, asking for help from the daughter they'd discarded, confronted with a husband they'd never bothered to know. They were the strangers here. I walked to the front door and opened it. I think you should leave. I'm not helping Preston. I'm not helping you. I'm done being the solution to your problems when you were never there for mine. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were real or performative. Harper, you can't mean this. We're your parents. I held the door open, my hand steady. You chose not to be. You made that choice when you disinherited me. When you chose Preston over me for the 1,000th time. When you made it clear I only mattered when you needed something. I'm just accepting the choice you already made. My father looked like he wanted to argue, to assert his authority, to demand compliance the way he'd done my whole life. But he saw something in my expression that stopped him. Maybe he saw that I was done, truly done, beyond the reach of his manipulation or his anger. He turned and walked out. My mother lingered, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You'll regret this, she said softly. Family is family, Harper. You'll realize that someday. I shook my head. Family is supposed to love you, support you, celebrate you. You never did any of those things. I have family now, real family, and they're nothing like you. She left without another word, and I closed the door behind them. Through the window, I watched them argue on the front lawn, gesticulating at each other, probably debating whether to come back and try again. Then they got in their car and drove away. I stood at the window, watching until their car disappeared around the corner, and then I started crying. Not sad tears, not exactly. Something more complicated. Grief for the parents I'd never had and never would have. Relief that I'd finally, truly stood my ground. Pride that I'd protected my peace and my marriage. Marcus wrapped his arms around me from behind, and we stood there together, watching the empty street. You did it, he whispered against my hair. You're free. And he was right. For the first time in my life, I was completely, entirely free. 6 months passed, and they were months of intentional healing and reconstruction. I started therapy with a woman in Portland who specialized in family dynamics and childhood trauma. Through our sessions, I began to understand the psychological framework I'd been living in for 29 years. My therapist introduced me to terms like scapegoat and golden child, explaining how narcissistic family systems assign roles to children and then punish them for either fulfilling or breaking those roles. I was the scapegoat, the child who could never do right, whose purpose was to make the golden child look better by comparison. Preston was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, who was enabled and excused and elevated regardless of his actual character or achievements. Understanding these patterns didn't erase the pain, but it gave me a framework to process it, to see that the dysfunction wasn't my fault or my failure. Marcus and I built a life that was deliberately different from everything I'd grown up with. Our house was warm and cluttered, full of books and art supplies and Marcus grading papers scattered across the dining table. We hosted dinner parties with friends who were teachers and artists and nonprofit workers, people who measured success by impact rather than income, who laughed loudly and argued passionately about ideas, and stayed late washing dishes in our small kitchen. My design business continued to grow, and in March, I was featured in a regional magazine about creative entrepreneurs. The article included photos of me in my home office, talking about building a business on your own terms. My grandmother sent me 3 copies of the magazine with a note that said, "So proud of you, darling. Marcus was nominated for a teaching award by his students' parents, who wrote letters about how Head transformed their children's relationship with history and learning. I attended the ceremony where he received the award, watching him give a characteristically humble speech about how teaching was its own reward, and he was just grateful to work with such amazing students. Afterward, his parents took us out to dinner, celebrating their son's achievement with genuine joy and pride. I watched them interact with Marcus, the easy affection and authentic interest, and realized this was what parents were supposed to be like. This was what I'd missed my entire life, this uncomplicated support and celebration. Marcus' mother squeezed my hand across the table and said, "We're so glad he found you, Harper. You've made our son happier than we've ever seen him." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to cry. My grandmother remained my one connection to the Montgomery family, and through her, I heard occasional updates about Preston's continuing downfall. His divorce from Vivienne was finalized with a settlement that left him with virtually nothing. The business fraud investigation resulted in hefty fines and probation, though my father's lawyers managed to keep him out of jail. Head moved back in with my parents, a 30-year-old man living in his childhood bedroom, financially dependent on the people who'd enabled his worst impulses for decades. My grandmother reported that family gatherings had become tense affairs where no one mentioned Preston's situation or my absence, everyone pretending that the perfect family image was still intact even as it crumbled around them. I didn't take pleasure in Preston's collapse, exactly. Mostly I felt a sad kind of vindication. Head built a life on lies and my parents' money, and when both ran out, there was nothing left. I'd built my life on my own work and a real relationship, and it was small but solid and entirely mine. Sometimes I wondered if my parents thought about me, if they regretted their choices, if they understood yet what they'd lost. But I was learning that it didn't matter what they thought. Their opinion had controlled my life for too long. I was done giving them that power. One evening in late June, almost a year after Preston's wedding, Marcus and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. He reached over and took my hand, our fingers interlacing automatically in the way of long-married couples. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Telling them about the wedding? Walking away from your family?" I thought about the question seriously, considering all the pain and loss and grief that had followed that choice. I thought about holidays spent with Marcus' family instead of my own, about baby announcements I'd never receive from Preston, about growing old without parents who cared. I thought about the inheritance I'd lost, and the family connections that had evaporated. And then I thought about the woman I'd become in the absence of their judgment and manipulation. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. I regret that they weren't capable of being better. I regret that I spent so long hoping they'd change. But I don't regret choosing myself, and choosing you, and choosing reality over their fantasy. This life we have, Marcus, it's real, it's ours, and it's better than anything I could have had if I'd kept trying to earn their approval." He brought my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I'm proud of how strong you've been, how you've built yourself back up. You're remarkable." His words settled into my chest, filling spaces that had been empty for as long as I could remember. Our first wedding anniversary arrived on a Tuesday in April, exactly 1 year after our quiet courthouse ceremony. Wed decided to celebrate by going back to the Italian restaurant where Wed had our wedding lunch, making it a tradition to return every year. The restaurant owner remembered us from before and gave us the same corner table, bringing out a complimentary dessert with a candle in it. We ate slowly, talking and laughing, remembering that perfect simple day when Wed promised ourselves to each other with no audience and no performance. Marcus gave me an eternity band, small diamonds circling the white gold, a symbol of our continuing commitment. I gave him a vintage pocket watch ID found at an antique store, engraved with the date of our wedding. We were giddy and romantic and completely content in our small celebration. Walking home hand in hand through Portland's quiet streets, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my grandmother, a photo of her and my grandfather on their wedding day decades ago. They were young and beautiful, standing outside a simple church in clothes that weren't expensive but were clearly their best. The message read, "Simple wedding, complicated family, beautiful life. Just like you. Proud of you, darling." I showed the photo to Marcus, and we stood under a streetlight looking at it. This evidence that you could survive a difficult family and build something good anyway. That love could be quiet and simple and still be powerful enough to last a lifetime. When we got home, I sat down at my desk and wrote this whole story, everything from Preston's wedding to this moment, because I wanted to remember it. I wanted to have a record of how I found my way from invisible daughter to independent woman, from scapegoat to person who knew her own worth. Writing it felt like closing a chapter, like taking all that pain and transformation and making it mean something. And now I'm sharing it with you because I know I'm not the only person who's ever felt invisible in their own family, who's ever been the forgotten child, who's ever had to choose between their authentic self and family approval. So, let me ask you this. Has your family ever made you feel like you had to earn love? Have you ever been the overlooked sibling? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family dynamics to save yourself? Drop your story in the comments because you're not alone, and neither am I. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because I'll be sharing more stories about family dynamics, about finding yourself, about building the life you actually want instead of the life others expect. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to choose yourself, that you don't owe anyone access to your life just because you share DNA. Thank you for listening to my story, for being here at the end of this journey. I hope it gave you something to think about, maybe some courage to set your own boundaries, maybe just the comfort of knowing you're not crazy for feeling hurt by family dysfunction. Remember this: your worth isn't determined by who claims you. Family is supposed to celebrate you, not just tolerate you. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who can't see your value, even if those people are your parents or siblings. Build your own table. Invite people who actually celebrate you. Live authentically. Even if it costs you relationships with people who only loved a false version of you. That's where real peace lives, in the truth of who you are and the courage to live it out loud. To everyone building a chosen family, to everyone who's been the scapegoat, to everyone who's ever been told their wedding wasn't good enough, or their partner wasn't suitable, or their life choices were disappointing, I see you. Your small, real, authentic life is worth more than any expensive performance. Your courthouse wedding or backyard ceremony or living room vows are just as valid as any $250,000 spectacle. Your teacher, spouse, or artist partner or blue-collar love is just as valuable as any trust fund match. You are enough, exactly as you are, and the people who can't see that don't deserve access to your beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect life. Thank you for being here. I wish you peace, healing, and the courage to choose yourself every single day. Now go live your real life, and let the people who can't appreciate it fade into the background where they belong.